In Albany, some pressing issues are awaiting debate, and if we're lucky, some quick legislative action. Among them are juvenile justice reform, charter schools, limits on local property taxes, the DREAM Act, and living wages. But one little item that was buried last year seems to be making progress in New York State. That's GMO labeling.
Last Tuesday, supporters of GMO labeling legislation, who say they have a right to know what they're eating and feeding their families, held a statewide protest in front of City Hall to Albany and then to Syracuse. But opponents, like the Agribusiness Alliance, say there's no evidence that genetically engineered food is unsafe.
Well, no opponents agreed to appear on today's show, but we do have the opportunity to ask several supporters of the bill what they're protesting and explain their movement and the legislation to Brooklynites. We want to welcome Emily Skydel. Thanks for being here.
Yep.
Oh, Emily.
Emily.
And Tassia Rosa, the project coordinators at New York Public Interest Research Group.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
in.
So just to clear the air so our viewers, we all understand, since one of you, Emily, why don't you define to us what a GMO is?
So a GMO is a genetically modified food. That means that it's been somewhat tampered to for a certain benefit of the producer of the food. So say maybe they want to make meat redder, so they'll add like genes from a strawberry into the meat to make it redder.
Because we want to buy red meat, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or they'll say sometimes they'll add like a Brazil nut gene into a peanut gene to change the genetic makeup, maybe for a certain purpose of the way the growing methods of it or something like that. So it's sort of tampering with the food in a way that's sort of covert, and we don't really know when it's happening or.
Right. All right.
So have you ever had a tangelo? Like that's like two great things brought together that's genetically, like there's so many examples of tampering that are delicious and, you know, we're still alive, so why the alarm now?
Absolutely. Really, I think the concern with GMOs is the lack of information. Many of these food products ended up being fast-tracked onto our grocery store shelves by the late 90s. The problem with that is the research is not there. There are not ample safety studies on many of these products. So for NYPIRG, this is more than anything a right to know issue. It's a freedom of choice issue. NYPIRG is the state's largest environmental and consumer advocacy group. So as a consumer issue, we're very big on this GMO legislation. Environmentally speaking, there are some definite concerns about GMO crops. For me, most notably that many of these GMOs are tampered with or manipulated genetically so that they can withstand huge amounts of pesticides. Pesticides, that's something that NYPIRG has passed a lot of legislation on, like the pesticide notification law. I think what's most important to note about this legislation is that a label is not a ban. We're not asking to impede the biotechnology here. We're asking for consumers to have the choice, to have a say in the matter.
Right. So what are the health concerns that we need to be thinking about in terms of GMO use?
Sure. I mean, one huge concern is allergies. So, you know, say you are allergic to Brazil nuts. They're using Brazil nut genes to produce peanuts, and people don't know about it, and they're getting allergic reactions to peanuts. You know, these are huge risks.
Okay.
There's some evidence, the most common pesticide is known as Roundup, which has been linked to increased cancer rates. Some would even say that some pesticides are endocrine blockers, so there's a lot of concern about how certain aspects of GMOs would impact children especially.
So looking at the issue now as we see it, there seems to be more public more fear than there are answers. So I want to know from you guys, you're working on college campuses, educating people. If you say GMO and Monsanto, these seem to be buzzwords, but there is not a lot of, it seems like unfounded fear to me from where we sit right now. So how do you convince people to get on your bandwagon?
Well, we really stress that it's a right to know. There are certainly people out there who are very adamant about banning GMOs, no to GMOs.
Right.
That's not our argument. For us, it's just a right to know. It's a consumer protection issue. It's saying, hey, people have the right to know what they're putting in their families' bodies.
Yeah.
And with organic food, it's not going to be GMO. The food that's not labeled organic is kind of, there's a big question mark. And not all of it is GMO. Some of it is GMO, some of it isn't GMO. So yeah, we really push it as a right to know issue.
Okay.
And a lot of students respond to that right away,
Right. So,
I think with college students, they're sort of at this point in their life where they're becoming empowered as consumers. They're paying tuition, they're doing their own grocery shopping. They're concerned about highly industrialized agriculture in this country. They're concerned about the practices of companies like Monsanto. Some of them are parents, some are feeding their own families. I think most notably, especially with young students, when they hear that many of these products made their way to the market by the late 90s, some of my students were born in 95, 96.
Right.
So they think about the fact that they may have been consuming these products their entire lives, completely unbeknownst to them. They're incredibly shocked. They feel betrayed to some extent. So that's where the fire and the passion for the right to know issue really comes through.
Right. And can you break down the bill that's currently in Albany?
So basically, A617 is the bill in the Assembly. The prime bill sponsor is Linda Rosenthal. She's a strong advocate for the environment. A few other supporters in the Assembly include Jeffrey Dinowitz, who's head of the Consumer Protection Committee. Crystal Peoples-Stokes is a great Assembly member. She shared a really great story at the rally about how she's really passionate about reading ingredients labels. She mentioned this anecdote where she takes one pill in the morning and takes one pill at night for diabetes. And since she started really analyzing her labels and her ingredients list, she doesn't have to take those pills anymore. So we're finding that the population is becoming so much more educated on food justice issues.
Yeah.
This is now a transitional time to get this labeling bill passed.
So speaking about educating the public, I know, God, even on the folks at Parks and Recreation, do you remember this episode about fluoride in the water, where that was something that people were very up in arms against, and it has all of these health benefits and science behind it, but it's something weird, like you're tampering with the water. Why isn't this one of those things where it may be much ado about nothing?
I mean, people were still, being given the information that the fluoride was in the water. So I guess it's a question of how much, is ignorance bliss. And I think in our society, we have so many labels on our foods. We have labels regarding nutritional facts, ingredients. Why wouldn't we have a label on there that says it's genetically modified? I mean, and the only groups that are against it really are these companies that are profiting off of us not knowing. There aren't really people out there that I've spoken to out on campus and in the community. We were out in Harlem and Staten Island speaking to community members. I haven't really been met with anyone who's like, well, I just don't want to know. And I mean, it's just a right to know, so.
But when does and not to press you on, but when does the right to know just become like this sort of rote hysteria for its sake? Like we have warning labels on safety belts in cars, on toothpaste, in plastic bags saying don't put this over your head. There's a warning label on everything. Like just because they're out there doesn't mean that it's helped our society at all. We're like, we sue each other more based over these silly warnings that are like, don't put this bag over your head and breathe deeply.
I think there is some concern out there about this being maybe a nanny state bill, something like that. The truth of the matter is that 64 countries have labels on genetically modified organisms. That includes the entirety of the European Union. Sometimes the industry likes to backfire about the increased cost of putting a label on there, but evidence shows that it's less than a penny a day to stick a new label on there. So.
And what do the opponents say? When you guys are talking to people, well, you're probably not talking to opponents, you're trying to, get students on board, but what is the argument? What's the opposite argument to this?
Absolutely.
I mean, what's the reason to not label this stuff?
The opposition is out there. And, some of these folks are environmentalists. I had a science student who said to me, and I thought this was very clever, we need GMOs because of climate change, was his argument. At the end of the day, this is a label, it's not a ban. We're not trying to impede the science here. But for those with extreme food allergies, for those who are choosing an organic lifestyle, they should benefit from a label.
And it is a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue. We have supporters on both sides of the aisle who support this bill for very different reasons. In terms of the 64 countries, it impedes our ability to trade as well. Countries in Europe don't want to import our foods because we don't have those same regulations that they have in place.
So this isn't fear-mongering?
No, I would say it's not. And there really is a big difference, like we said before, between the No GMOs campaign and the GMO Labeling campaign. There's a very big difference.
Right.
So who do you think is going to benefit if you had to say that side, the sort of no GMOs, they're horrible, down with Monsanto, versus the people who say we need it for the future, our world is changing, our food has to change? Who does this labeling benefit then?
Well, it allows us to really have the discussion. When we're left in the dark, one of the phrases in our campaign, dining in the dark, when we're left in the dark, we can't begin to have these conversations about the subtleties. Maybe GMOs are okay under these circumstances. They're not great in this particular situation. So we can't even delve into the complexity of it if we're just left far removed from it, which is what we are now.
And Chipotle just announced that they're not going to be using GMO foods. I mean, is that the wave? Are they the leaders now of this movement? Are there other organizations or other restaurant chains you think they're going to be making that choice as well?
I think that it's definitely exciting. I think that it's a huge move, absolutely. There are a lot of people calling for transparency in their food choices. I know that my students will be a lot happier entering Chipotle these days. I think in terms of who's going to benefit from this GMO labeling law, of course, those who opt for organic foods, those who are trying to shop local. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, here in New York City, we still have food deserts. We have folks all over the city who don't have access to fresh local food. So if they could, at the very least, know whether or not their food is genetically modified, I think that they would feel a lot more comfortable in their choice.
So is there anyone working in your organization who you personally know of, or maybe you guys even, who isn't opposed to GMOs? You've gotten me to the point where I say, fine, no matter how you feel about it, it's still a labeling issue and a right to know. So is there anyone working in your movement who wants the right to know and would still choose to go with GMOs?
I think that's more of a rarity, but most recently at our sustainability fair, plenty of science students approached me about how they felt there was a need for this technology. And when I explained that this was very simply an issue of freedom of choice, that we're asking for transparency, they seemed more open to the legislation at that point, because it can't really be denied that if you're allergic to strawberries and there's a strawberry gene in your salmon, that could pose a huge health risk.
Okay. So what are the chances of this bill actually passing? Because it was killed off in California, which is, a lot of people would say is more a progressive state than New York.
Right. There's a very good chance it will pass. Last year, I think it lost by 1 vote.
Oh, who did that?
So when we went to Albany, I spoke to a number of chiefs of staff of different legislators, and they were all incredibly open to it. You don't. For the most part, at least from my experience, I haven't received hostile, sort of antagonism towards the bill. It's more just I need to read both sides and make my decision.
Right.
I don't know.
I would say the bill still has some work to do, absolutely. For anyone at home, you can take small action today, quick action, call your assembly member representative and urge them to ask Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie to move A617 to a vote in the Codes Committee. Once it makes its way through Codes, it's then on to Ways and Means, and from there should really gain some traction. So there's definitely still some work to do, but based on our lobby day in Albany, there seemed to be a lot of support for the issue. So we're excited.
So before you guys get out of here, who is on the other side then? There was lots of support on lobby day. Is money from agro-tech business working on the other side, or?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. There's a lot of money being put into lobbying on the other side.
Okay, but again, on the other side, it seems like if there's an other side, this isn't a neutral issue. Like there can't be another side if we just want to inform people. So which side? You say it's like, okay, we want people to know, but then there's another side. How did you guys get caught up in that?
So the other side is really the industries that feel they'll financially benefit most from people not knowing.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Yeah, so it's really not people. It's not a people-backed, there's no like people-backed large movement
Right.
towards against labeling. It's
money.
industry. Yeah.
Right, the industry.
Yeah.
We know that Monsanto and Bheard, they're in the hearings
Yeah.
in Albany too. We don't know the specifics about the numbers spent on lobbying just yet, but we know that they have a presence in Albany and they're starting to push their agenda. So going forward, we'll see what the summer looks like. I'm sure we'll be making more visits to local grocery stores all over New York City,
Right.
fielding calls to assembly members and state senators to make
Right.
sure that we can show public support for the issue.
There aren't people out there with signs like pro-GMO, right? Like, I don't want to know what's in my food.
So if the labels
Matt.
are there, if given the choice, would you guys go for the non-GMO alternative?
You know, I think I'm a big ingredients list reader. I don't have any food allergies though. So, you know, I also don't have a ton of money to buy strictly organic. So I think based on a simple short ingredients list,
Yeah.
even if it did contain GMOs, I might be open to purchasing that product. But I think most importantly, people want the choice.
Right.
Emily?
Yeah, and I mean, I think once we have the labels on there, we can begin rolling out more research and more understanding of each specific fruit. Maybe certain vegetables, GMO, are totally fine. Maybe some that you want to watch out for. So it's hard to say. I don't think I would be so much like against all GMOs.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Definitely.
All right.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you very much.
Shedding some lights on legislation.
That's
We
right.
Appreciate it.